Kwai ni bak. Hello, my friends. Jesse and I are very pleased to be here tonight. And we want to begin with what we would call a welcoming or a greeting song. It is traditional that we think of ourselves as joining together in a circle like the shape of the strum. And the sound of the drum, that double beat, is the sound of the heartbeat, the sound we all share. The first music you heard, even before you breathed the air, for your mother's heart was beating all around you. So when we hear the drum, it reminds us that we're all connected, that we should listen to our mothers. And also we call the heartbeat of Mother Earth the drum beat. So it connects us all together. And this Kwai ni bak, hello my friends, is basically the message of this particular song. You guano de you guano da. You guano de you guano da. Gaiwani hey yokyo hey. Gaiwani hey yokyo hey. Gaiwani hey yokyo hey. Gaiwani hey yokyo hey. You guano de you guano da. You guano de you guano da. Gaiwani hey yokyo hey. Gaiwani hey yokyo hey. Gaiwani hey yokyo hey. Gaiwani hey yokyo hey. You guano de you guano da. By the way we would normally do that song in the old days was when you were approaching a village, you let them know you were coming. You were there on that super highway that we call the Quanituk, the Connecticut River, because people would travel on the rivers. You would sing this song from the canoe, and those on shore would sing back a welcoming song to let those in the canoe know that they recognized them as friends, greeted them as friends, welcomed them as friends. And so, my friends, here we are today, ready to share with you, coming in our digital canoe.
Katsiulu and Ina Mitongwes and India Louise Jesse Bruchac, and I'm Jesse Bruchac, and really pleased to be here tonight for Natami Insada Alo Kanal for First Wednesdays, as would be said Alnombaiwi in the original language of this land. That song welcomes us too, and you can see it behind me, perhaps all of the Wabanaki home country we'd call Ndakinna. I'd like to take a step back into the history of Ndakinna with a traditional story to begin after that welcoming song. And stories have been told for a long time in Ndakinna and are still told today. And they're always told for at least two reasons, and especially at this time of year. When the nights are very long, the days are short, people would gather together in small wigwamal, an Abenaki word, small homes. And the stories were a time to learn about the history, to learn of our traditions, our culture, but also to be entertained. So they both educated and entertained us in these long nights. And as I tell this story every so often, it's a habit and it is a tradition to say ho. And if I say ho, I know you're all muted, but I can see your mouths. Please say together hey in one voice. Ho. This is a story that takes place before all others. It's the story of creation, and it's one that would only be told at this time of year between first and last frost. Such an important thing, the frost, the winter, that we count not only years by winters, kasi gadin, so many years, we also count our own age, kasi gadma, the age that you are, is how many winters you have been through. How many times you've been able to sit around and hear the stories, and this one may take a long time to tell, and we just have a little time together. So I'll share a bit of it. We're so lucky to still have, to carry this language forward, this language of this land, to at this moment, virtually, a class is going on that I often lead this evening. Of many people, some of whom have joined us here tonight. Kwai Tina, Tanikadon Holzin, and Wigondam Namiolan. It's good to see you. And it's great that we still have these words as this story begins. Noa Nongoniwi, long ago. Niagwa Monza Saik Tabodak and Dasi Daldamin. Uskit kamigwa udzi, we lead bona, ni inkizi dahon damin, pam kami gek. It's said that Tabaldak, translated the owner. Tab really means it's a job, it's a responsibility, the one that balances, that brings balance. Tabaldak, by wish of that one's mind, brought into being the world. Uskit kamigwa. In the sky, placing guides, alakwasak. Literally, alakwasak, those ones that guide us. The stars, alakwasak. Nani Ponsat, the moon, the night traveler. And Kizos, the sun, the day traveler. This one Tabaldak had created the world and the stars and the sun and the moon, but still there was a bit of creation's dust left over on those hands of creation. And so Tabaldak simply cleaned the hands of creation, and dust fell, that remaining dust fell down to the earth. Ndano paiwi udzi kiyomo abi nikwombi, not far from where you sit today, right now. That dust sprinkled down upon the earth. And because it was the dust of creation, where that dust fell, the earth began to move around. Ho! The earth pulled itself together, pulling everything from around it into a Pitiguadzo, a round mountain, and from that shaped Nisnol Pedinal, 2 arms, with Nisnol Mildzial, 2 hands, and using those hands shaped an Uhaga, a body, and Udep, a head, and sat there upon the earth. Ho! Well, Tabaldak saw all things and saw this happening below. And Tabaldak asked a simple question, one that if we had time, I'd ask all of you. The first and most important question, Awani Kia, who are you? But there was no answer. This one just sat there upon the earth. And so Kitsinowask, who was very patient, in Toipla, very good at waiting, in Toipla, Kitsinowas na dodomawa agama mina, asked this one again, Awani Kia, who are you? Kanwa mina agama onda ud on zi dawima. Again, this one did not answer. And so Kitsinowask asked in Sada a third time, Awani Kia. But again, there was no answer. Kitsinowask asked again a fourth time, Awani Kia. After asking 4 times and not hearing a response, Kitsinowask decided to help this one. And I apologize, I'm calling Tabaldak Kitsinowask, the great mystery, that one we call the owner as well, Kitsinowask and Tabaldak. Well, that one Tabaldak or Kitsinowask decided to help this one who was sitting on the earth, reached to an asok in the sky, a cloud, and pulled forth 4 badongi pakwa'al, 4 thunder arrows, bolts of lightning. Took one of those bolts of lightning and threw it straight down upon this one's udep that it had shaped so beautifully. It hit right on that one's head, creating 2 openings. That bolt of lightning split in half and created 2 openings, the first 2 ears, so this one could hear those words from Tabaldak. Well, Tabaldak wasn't done. Threw another bolt down that split and created 2 more openings, the first 2 Msizugol, eyes, so that this one could see the beauty of creation all around it, the stars for guidance, the sun, the moon, all the beauty of Ndakinna, of our land. But Kitsinowask, that great mystery, had and threw it down this bolt as well and created 2 more openings in this one's Udepek, this one's had 2 nostrils, udzolon. So this one could smell all that was good from all that was bad in the world. So this one could smell to guide itself as well, use its nose, a powerful thing. Well, Tabaldak had just one last Padongi Pakwa. And Tabaldak threw that last thunder arrow down, and it did not split. It struck and made one last opening. 7 sacred openings in this one's head, openings we all share and experience the world through. That final opening, the mouth, udon, so that this one could drink the water, so it could see Uliuni for that water of our land, eat to survive, be strong, but also so this one could speak and answer that question that Tabaldak had. Tabaldak asked again, Awani Kia, who are you? And this one looked up, those new eyes, opened that new mouth and said, Odzihozo, Nia. I am Odzihozo. I am the one who shapes himself. Oh, you are wonderful, Tabaldak said. Well, Odzihozo looked around and said, it is not I who's wonderful. Look at all that you have made. You are the one who's wonderful. And Odzihozo saw that world all around him where he sat and wanted to see more. And so started to travel. But Odzihozo had never been before and didn't know how to travel. Just took those hands that it had used to shape its body and head and began to push on the earth, pushing so hard that it pushed up mountains on either side. This one had great power, not only to shape itself, but to shape the world around it, pushing up on one side, the Adirondack Mountains, on the other side, the Green Mountains. As it pushed those mountains, it did move. That one, Odzihozo, did move along and see more of the land. But Odzihozo wanted to move more quickly and reached out and grabbed the top of those mountains that he'd shaped and pulled. His fingers dug deep and created channels in those mountains, which as Soglun, the rains came, became rivers like the Winooski, the Otter Creek, the Saranac, and the Adirondacks. Well, this one traveled for a long way like this. And eventually, Tabaldak again decided to help this one and looked down and said, Kia anda wizuongan taonlawi Odzihozo nian laudam kia kedatsui uwazunem wizuongan bemigidzim pombazit. I don't think, my friend, that you should be called Odzihozo. I think you should be called the one who crawls around on his butt. Odzihozo was insulted, but realized, like often children do, that this Tabaldak was just trying to help him point something out that was true. Odzihozo done a great job shaping himself, but never shaped any legs, and was just sliding around the world on his butt. But Migi Dzin Pom Bazit wasn't a name that he wanted to keep. And realizing the mistake that he'd made, like all of us, when we make mistakes, we can learn from them, make things better. They're teachers. Tabaldak had shown him something that needed to be done, and Odzihozo looked around and used those hands again and pulled together the earth, shaping 2 strong legs so that Odzihozo could stand up and travel, stand like the first human and speak, and be given a new name, one we call Klus Gomba. Kluz is to speak, kluzi. Omba is to stand. Omba also means to be seen or to see. That's where we get the word Ombanaki, from the dawn, when the sun rises up and is seen again. And so Glus Gomba stood, able to now move around more easily. Glus Gomba decided that he'd travel to the top of those mountains, and he stepped over one of those mountains and sat down, making it into his seat. We know this mountain to this day. Tawipoda Wadzo, the seat mountain, saddle mountain, camel's hump. Sat there on top of that mountain and said, I too can make things, Tabaldak. I too have great power to even rival yours. Well, Tabaldak looked down and said, what is it that you can make other than yourself? Well, Gluskomba made a wish, Adasi Daldamin, Udzi Willi de Bona, from his mind. And from that wish, Kinlom Sin, the winds, were created. And those winds blew strong because Gluskomba had great power. Those winds grew so strong that they blew the trees right over, uprooted them, killing all the trees in the land, laying it bare. Tabaldak yelled out, Tabat, Tabat, enough, enough. I've seen your power. What is it that you can do to rival that? Gluskomba asked. Oh? Well, Tabaldak made a Dasi Daldam as well, a wish of mind. And the winds came again, but it was different. It was a warm wind, an Ulonda. That warm wind came from the south and blew around that mountain, Awipuda Wadzo, around and swirled around Gluskomba until it came up to Gluskomba's head and his long, beautiful hair and twisted it all up into a nice, tight Tiskondaba knot. Well, Gluskomba did everything he could to get that knot undone, but he couldn't. It was so tight, tied perfectly, klabidon, by that wind made by Tabaldak. Do you need some help, my son? Asked the Creator. Yes, I do. Liula damana widzo kami. And then Creator made another wish, and that wind blew and blew all the hair right off the top of Gluskomba's head. And then that same wind blew across the land and carried within it the magic of Tabaldak. And from under the earth, the roots of those trees grew up again in moments. The forest returned. Gluskomba looked around at the beauty of them and realized the mistake that he had made. Tabaldak also knew that Gluskomba needed some help. I mentioned the story is long. I'll tell just one more part of it. And I'm not telling all, just the important parts that I would like to share tonight that come to me. Tabaldak saw that this one Gluskomba needed help, needed guidance. And before leaving that mountain top, Gluskomba noticed someone by a rock, a woman who was already an old woman, full of wisdom, a grandmother, his Nokomis. Now, there were no human beings yet in the land, but that would change. This was Nokomis Agask. This was a grandmother woodchuck. And like all grandmothers, she was full of wisdom to share with her grandson. And the first thing she said to him was, grandson, you need to prepare the world for the coming of your grandchildren. That is your job. You need to make the rivers less dangerous and the mountains, those cliffs are so steep from when you push them up. You need to clean the world. You have a lot of work to do. Your grandchildren will come soon. And Gluskomba listened to his grandmother and he began to work. And there are many stories about this time and adventures that Gluskomba had. He traveled all over the world. He traveled far to the north to Mi'kmaq, the land of the Mi'kmaq people, all the way out to the west, all the way to the south, and returned back to our lands again. And grew kind of sick of all this work and thought there has to be an easier way. The world is still so dangerous and I've been working for so long. Perhaps what I could do is just make the people, my grandchildren, really, really strong. Oh, I could make them out of the strongest thing I've seen in all the land, and it's right here in a place we call Mazip Squabi, Masiskoi Bay. There's a stone here, it's so strong. And it's so cold in our land in the winters, this stone can make fire. So I'll make the people from this, people of flint coats, stone giants. I'll make them huge, as tall as the clouds. And so it was that Gluskomba shaped the very first human beings from that stone. And like that stone, their hearts were hard. They were full of fire. Their eyes would light up all night with that fire. And as they walked through Ndakinna, they crushed those trees. And Tabak was not happy at all with this creation of Gluskomba and reached down with one hand of creation and scooped up every one of those stone giants. They say some escaped though, and there are stories about a few who got away. And Tabak smashed those first humans made of stone. Their bones are all over our land to this day. It's why it's so rocky, they say, around here. We look down and we see the stones, and they remind us of what could happen with our bones if we live like those stone giants. Well, Gluskomba had many more adventures, but learned from that he needed to make the human beings out of another material. He remembered that failed contest with Tabeldak. He remembered those trees and looked at the ash tree and saw how when the wind blew, it didn't fall over, it bent. It was deeply rooted to the earth. And so he took his maple bow and fired arrows into the trunks of those trees. The Ma'ahlakwis, the ash tree. And out of those trees stepped the first Alnombak, the first Abenaki people. The first Wambanakiak stepped forward, and like those ash trees, have remained deeply rooted to the earth with hearts that are green and growing. And if you look at the ash tree, it's an extremely important tree for Abenaki people to this day, and for snowshoes and baskets and so many things. On the bark, there are the shapes of diamonds. And I began my stories talking about Alakwasak, our guides, and Mahalakwasak is the ash tree. And they say Maha is to gather, Alakwasak, the stars, that the stars were gathered there, and that we have all come, all human beings, through those ash trees from the stars, from Alakwas, to that place where we come from and that place where we return to. Alakwas Ondi, the Star Road or the Milky Way. And that is where I will end that story for today. Kitsi Ulioni, like to turn it over to my Nimitongwis, my father.
Ulioni, Namo. Thank you, Jesse. That was really beautiful. When we hear the stories, we hear many things. And I should point out a little history here. Several decades ago, our tribal nations were not recognized by the state of Vermont. Well, actually, they were recognized, then they were de-recognized. And there was a long struggle for decades that we were involved very intimately in to try to regain that recognition, which now 4 of our tribal groups have. We are enrolled in the Nulhegan Coas band of the Vermont Abenaki Nation, and proud to be so. By the way, Abenaki or Abenaki, either pronunciation is okay. Abenaki is sort of the Anglicization, the popular way of saying it, but Abenaki is closer to the way we'd say it within the language, with the emphasis on the 3rd syllable from the end, which is the way we pronounce our words. And Abenaki or Abenaki can be translated in a couple of ways, but key is definitely earth, and Aben or Waban, like Wabanaki, as you see behind Jesse in that picture, is actually the dawn or the beginning or the light land. All those things are connected together. We are the people furthest to the east, although we actually call ourselves Alnoba, just human beings, Alnobak, and we are people of the land and of the soil. And at that time, when we were engaged in an interesting struggle with the state of Vermont for recognition, we took part in fish-ins up in the area around Swanton, Vermont, deliberately fishing without a license. By the way, the Vermont Abenaki now have been granted hunting and fishing rights, Aboriginal rights to hunt and fish without a license. And they basically gave us various summonses, and a court trial took place. I testified at that trial. I testified as a traditional storyteller. And the judge's name was Wolacek, Judge Wolacek. And at the beginning of my testimony, I said, I will explain to you that although I am a Abenaki, I am a person who also has native blood and European blood. And the European ancestry in my family is from Slovakia. And the judge got a big grin on his face. I learned later he was Slovak in ancestry. And as I told my stories, the Vermont state lawyer kept objecting. And every time the lawyer objected, Judge Wolochek said, "Objection overruled. I want to hear the rest of the story." And the stories I told, like that story of creation, pointed out the long, long memory we have of being in this land. That we know the names of the rivers, the mountains. We know the stories connected to those places, and those places know us. We were here for at least 10,000 years. And quite frankly, even though glaciers covered most of what is Vermont, I think we were still there then because, as my Inuit friends up north know, it is easy to live on top of the ice, and glaciers move very slowly. So our tenure on this land is marked not in decades or seasons, but in millennia. That's important to remember. It's also true that within traditional culture throughout North America, and there's no exception here, we do not think of things in short term. We think of, for example, 7 generations. How will what I do today affect those 7 generations from now? So we're not just thinking of the next presidential election. We're not just thinking of even the next decade. We're thinking of 7 generations from now. What will happen as a result of my actions? That's why measuring things by dollars is such a foolish thing, because dollars cannot really be eaten. Although, as one of my elders, Dewa Senta, who was a clan mother of the Onondaga Nation, once said to me, "There's nothing wrong with money, it's just that all the wrong people have it," which I think is a great way to look at things. Just as there's nothing wrong with technology, it's that it's being used incorrectly. Instead of used to communicate and to help, it is often used to denigrate and to harm. And we need to keep in mind the importance of that, for we have the possibility of 2 ways of thinking. We may think with the good mind, we may think with the twisted mind. We have to observe where we are and how we are thinking at any given time. In fact, I was told by a very dear friend of mine, Madawi Maurice Dennis, that we human beings have something very important. We have that ability to change our minds, to think properly and well. If you look behind me, you'll see up there, there's a moose. Moose is one of the animals. We have many stories about the moose. It is said that when you hunt the moose, you must always offer tobacco beforehand, and that moose will accept it and make it possible for you to take it. But also the moose's name in the Abenaki language means the strange one, and it can also imply the angry one. Moose looks a little strange and can be very angry. And when you are angry, it is said you're a moose walda. You are thinking in a twisted way instead of a straight way. You're sort of acting like an angry moose instead of like a real human being who knows how to share and behave properly. I didn't mention another thing, which I think is important, and that is that giving thanks is one of the most important things we can do. We have traditions of Thanksgiving, which go back far before the ceremony that United States has, because Thanksgiving was every season there was something to be thankful for, and every day there was something to be thankful for. I was fortunate enough some years ago to translate a diary of Fidelia Fielding, a Mohegan elder, and the Mohegans are our cousins just to the south of us. And in her diary, written in the Mohegan language, she would say things like, "Today I am able to stand. I give thanks for that. Mundu we go. The Creator, the Great Spirit is good. It is good that I am able to walk around. Mundu we go. These things are good. These small things we take for granted are great blessings that we need always to give thanks for." I hold in my hand right now water. Water is forgotten all the time. The gift of water is something we neglect constantly. And yet I've been told again and again by different elders like Atian Lolo, Stephen Laurent, who was an Abenaki elder, said he always tried to remember whenever he took a drink to say thank you first, because when you drink, I say, "Olio ni nabi," thank you, water. That's really good. And I think that being thankful will mean that you will also receive thanks. We've just gone past the time of year when is the New Year's greeting moon, Alamikos Kisos, the moon of greeting. We say there are 13 moons in the year, the equivalent of months, 28 days each. And if you look at the back of the turtle, there are 13 plates, one for each moon. My friend and teacher, Madawi Lasas, Maurice Dennis, said those moons stand for the 13 different Abenaki nations and also the 13 different moons that we have in every year. And in that first moon of the new year, Alamikos Kisos, the New Year's greeting moon, the tradition is to go around from house to house and say, Analdamawe Kasipoyalawalang, which means I ask forgiveness for anything I may have done. For indeed, who knows what you've done that may irritate or anger or harm someone. But if you begin the year by asking for that forgiveness, then the person responds in a similar way, saying, I forgive you, and now I ask for your forgiveness. Then things again remain in balance. Those are things that remind us why we are here, that we are here. One of the stories of Kluskomba is the story of the water monster. And I'll tell this very briefly, for I know our time together is short. It is said that long ago, the people lived along the Quanituk, the long river, and life was good, for that river water gave them so many things. When we go to schools, I ask children, what did the river give them? And they say, oh, they could drink the water. They could fish in it. They could water their plants. They could travel on their canoes. And that was true. All that and more was true. But one day the water in that river began to go down and stopped running entirely and dried up. The people said, how can we survive without our river? And the group of young men and young women went upstream to see if perhaps a landslide had blocked that water. And what they found was a great dam built. And behind it, they could hear someone saying in a loud, deep voice, Ogleboom, Ogleboom, Ogleboom. And then a great monster stood up from behind that dam with long green fingers, huge bulging eyes, a great big head, a giant of a creature, and they ran from it. When they got back to the village, they said, how can we fight a monster? That is when Kluskomba arrived. He walked into the village and they told him what had happened. He said, I will see what I can do. I will speak with that one. And Kluskomba walked upriver till he came to that dam, heard that monster saying, Agleboom, Agleboom, I will give him none, I will give him none. And Kluskomba called out, why do you need all that water? And Agleboom said, I need it to float around in, I need it to float around in. And Kluskomba said, you must share that water. 4 times he asked. And the 4th time, Agleboom just dropped a handful of mud right on top of Kluskomba, buried him in the mud. Kluskomba dug out of that mud, wiped it out of his eyes and his nose and his ears and his mouth. And then he saw he had to do something. He had been given great power by the Creator, the power to change things and also to change himself. So he stomped upon the earth and grew twice as tall, a 2nd, a 3rd, and a 4th time. Each time he grew taller until finally he was taller than the trees. He reached out, pulled up a dead pine tree, swung it around like a club, and broke open that dam. Agleboom came rushing out to attack him, and Kluskomba grabbed him and squeezed. And Kluskomba squeezed so hard that Agleboom's eyes bulged out even more. His cheeks puffed out, and his back got bent. And Kluskomba said, you are too dangerous to be a monster. I'm going to change you. He began to run his hand along that monster's back until Agleboom was so small he fit into his hand. He was the first bullfrog. And Kluskomba tossed him back into the water, where he is to this day. Sometimes at night he may try to fright you by calling out, Agleboom, 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 but he's only a little frog. And that water now flows freely for all to share. And that's a very brief telling of that very ancient story. I think Jesse wanted to share a poem with us all now, if he would like to do that and say a word about it.
Would you like to do a poem Kasiwi Alomiwi Wikigan Eknikwambi? Kizila
Iglismoni first or Wabanaki?
Alnombaiwi?
Alnobai? Okay.
Kitsilioni. This is a poem that comes from a book called Nisnol Siboal. We spoke a little bit about the waters and the rivers. And this is a book that says 2 rivers, Nisnol Siboal, and reminds us of that. And in one page, it's in Abenaki, and on the the opposite page, it's in English. So this is one that reminds us, I feel, that we do sometimes lose our way. We sometimes lose track of the stars and the sun and the moon that are there to guide us. And I want to read this to give thanks to those people. I feel my father and so many others in my life have done this for so many people. I say Kitsiliani Nimitongus, Musamis, to all the other elders and teachers and guides that lead us back to the light. And so this is a poem that we put in this book together, and I'd love to do it for you tonight. Nobom sa winoak. It's the origin of the family Obamsuan, and we have many friends who've done a great deal of this work in this family. Perhaps it means pathfinders. Some say it means fire keepers. It's the name of this poem. Kitsilioni, the Obamsuan family. Nobom sa winoak, son kipozit kizos, pomosat udon dik pakagon asok.
Pathfinders, sun rises, walks his path across the sky.
Kisizagonawal, nozo kamanal kizos, wasakano, wombanek, li naki hlant.
Our eyes follow sun's bright journey from dawn to dusk.
Walongwi hla onda, inuguit sipana, kokamasna nani ponsat kina kionak.
Evening comes. We are not alone. Grandmother Moon looks down on us.
Miko la wongan kiona waidziwi ao ondik bagadziwi wasanek.
Reminding us there is always a path back to light.
It's Leonina Mitongas.
Could you play a little bit on that flute of yours? I played a little bit on mine, but the flute is a very important instrument for us. We say it's a gift from the trees that was originally a hollow branch. A woodpecker made holes in it, and thus the parts of the flute are the branch, and then the top, which is the external reed, is the bird, and then the flute itself, the bird sits on the bird's nest. And the fourth part of the flute, of course, is the breath, like the wind that blew across that branch and made that sweet music. And there are many stories about the flute, but for now, just hearing it may be enough.
See you, Leonie. I had one other poem that I wanted to share, and then if we could get some assistance, maybe some questions. Nimitongus, does that sound good? So the story that I told was very old, and that my father told was very old, but there's so many new things still, like our hearts are green and growing. Uski is new. Askasquigin, Askasquiguakwadzuak would be the green mountains. It comes from the Abenaki language. It means they're green and growing. Uski. And to be a people, we need to be that way. And so there's new literature, new music, new things being created all the time. There are many things. And this is something that came to me last night, keeping in mind that our theme was that we are still here. This poem came to me last night. It's called Ndakinok. And Ndakinna means our land. And Ndakinna is the whole area in the red here. Ndakinna, our land. And it's an inclusive term. Ndakinna is the term that just includes our people, where Kidakina would be the world. Ndakinna is just inclusive of the Abenaki speaking people. So it would be exclusive of those outside of that group. We have the two forms of we or our in the language, which is really powerful. And Ndakinok would mean in our land. And that's the name of this poem, Ndakinok, in our land. Ndakinok, in our land. Theft by our erasure continues to today. Ndakinok, in our land. Long before Metacom's cry to rise and Greylock's reply. Long after the first reservation at Scatacoke, a few miles from my home. To the Green Mountains, Askasquiguak Adenak, where my great-grandfather visited our relations. To Missisquoi, north of the artificial line where his father was raised, in Ndakinok, in our land. Where scalp bounties, residential schools, stolen children from mother's arms, eugenics, led to hidden languages, hidden songs, hidden ceremonies, hidden roots, hidden in Ndakinok, where they grew in shelters unseen, to appear again to teach, to sing, to pray, to love, roots, deeply planted in Ndakinok, like the ash trees. Once again we rise, once again we see the sun and say, Uli Uni, thank you, in Ndakinok.
You know, I saw a question appear just now in the chat. What happens when the ash trees are gone? I have to tell you something. This earth is very resilient. If we just leave it alone, it can heal itself. We once had chestnut trees everywhere in the Northeast, and then a blight, and also even more than that, a program by the government to cut down and remove all chestnut trees happened. Yet there is a chestnut tree growing behind my house to this day. And every year chestnuts fall from it. And I think if we give the land respect, those things which may seem to be disappearing will not go. Just as the moose has come back again to our land. When I was a child, the moose was not here, nor was it in Vermont, and yet the moose has come back again. The earth, the waters, the air has power to heal if we give it respect. And we must think of that for our children and our children's children to come. Mm-hmm. Over to other questions, but I had to answer that one because it ties so clearly.
I heard a really heartwarming story and song. We tell a story about Osban, the trickster raccoon, trying to trick Bluebird, who sang the most beautiful song. And when I tell that story, people say, oh, there's no more bluebirds in Ndakinna. And then the last few years, they've been returning.
That's right.
With their beautiful song.
Yes, and like sweetgrass still grows in our region. I remember years ago, my friend Andre Newton, who is the daughter of Maurice Dennis, went to the Keene Valley where she knew her father used to gather sweetgrass. She got out of the car. She was in a hurry. She couldn't find sweetgrass anywhere. She was so upset. She went back home, and just then her mother arrived. And she said, Mom, all the sweetgrass that Dad used to pick, it's all gone. And her mother said, get in the car. They drove back to that very spot, and they climbed out, and her mother said, look. And they looked down, and there was sweetgrass growing all around them. She had walked through it because she was in such a hurry. Things are here if we have the time to see them too, and don't rush ourselves. I think we should better let you curate questions now. You could do that perhaps, Jess.
Okay, I'm just reading here. How do you feel about including Abenaki native names in place name signs in the region? Is that an effort?
It is an effort, and it's really it's a really wonderful effort that I am involved in helping with. Our tribal communities, Nulhegan, I know is very involved in this project, as well as the other communities in the area. There are already many place names here, and people have forgotten that they are from our language. So one, it's a matter of education and a recognition, and then it's also a return of some of these older names that have been lost. So it's a combination of both happening, and I think it's a wonderful chance for us to re-indigenize and reconnect to this land that has had old names, and these old names are important for us to recognize and speak once again.
Yeah, we have to give a shout out to Chief Don Stevens too, because Don is a truly energetic and positive person who is doing all the things that I think need to be done right now for us, for our larger community as people of the Northeast, as well as Indigenous people. So thank you for that, Don, and for all the work that you're doing. It's an honor to be a part of our community.
Here, here.
Mhm.
There's a good question here. How can we, I'm assuming she's meaning as white people, partake in the native customs and culture without being disrespectful and appropriating?
Well, we have ceremonies and traditions that are open to the public. For example, we still have powwows and gatherings of that nature. In fact, if it were not for COVID-19, every year we put on our own Native American festival in Saratoga Springs in Congress Park, where Abenaki people used to come and make baskets in the summertime. And we couldn't do it this year, but there are other similar ceremonies which are open to the public. It's a great way to begin. If you're invited, go. If we do something at the State House, you're invited to go there. If we're doing something at the University of Vermont, you're invited, go there. It's just a question of, you don't go to people's houses and knock on the door and say, hey, tell me what it's like to be Catholic. You know, similarly, you don't do that to Native people, but there are places where it's appropriate and we make it open. And those places are often the powwows and the ceremonies and the gatherings.
Mm-hmm.
So here's somebody who's asking about when she teaches about Abenaki and use your books, she's not familiar with how to pronounce some of the words like Gluscabi.
Gluskomba is also said gluskap to the north in this region of Mi'kma'ki, or the home of what's often said Micmac people. The Mi'kmaq is gluskap. It's the same name, gluskap, just pronounced a little differently in their language. Could be gluskabe among the Penobscot, and then it's gluskomba among Western Abenaki speakers, which is what we have in New Hampshire, Vermont, Lower Quebec.
And Jesse does have a website, and he is teaching the Abenaki language online. So there are those resources you can go to. And we're pretty easily accessible, Jesse and myself. So don't feel bad about emailing us or asking us those questions. And I often have arguments with my publishers. I want to put pronunciation guides in every book I publish because it's sometimes hard for people to figure things out. But even with pronunciation guides, they still have problems. And all I can say is, it's not bad if you make a mistake once. Don't teach people that mistake. Understand that you can always correct an error.
And correcting an error, a wonderful opportunity. Now I see a question. I didn't have time to say that when Gluskomba stood, a wonderful place name was created. That place, Bitaobak, Bitaobagok. And he returned, we now call it Champlain, the water between those mountains, literally the waters between, and turned himself into a stone we call rock dunder in English. And that stone is called still to this day in Abenaki, Odzihozo, that first name that he gave to himself, the one who shaped himself. And that can be seen from Battery Park in Burlington. And there's a note about that Odzihozo returned to the place that he found most beautiful of everywhere he'd traveled and everything he'd done, that one place, Lake Champlain, where he first shaped himself and had changed so much, is where he sits and looks out over us to this day.
Yeah, I saw the mention of our dear friend Wolfsong, who was a really close friend of ours. I was sort of his teacher and Jesse was sort of his student, but that's not really it. We're all kind of the same level, if you know what I mean. And he was an incredible storyteller and just a really warm, good human being. We actually still have copies of his CDs. If anyone wants to buy them, we can provide them. And we're always in touch with his children and his family. So remember that name, Wolfsong. He was, and you know, one thing, a story about Wolfsong, which is interesting. back when he first started doing public storytelling, his aunt called him up and said, "What are you doing? You're letting people know we exist and they're going to come get us." Because she had experienced and lived through the eugenics project. And she was sure that if people said, "I'm a Abenaki," they're going to come and get us. So there was still a lot of fear, even in the 70s and 80s, about being identified as Native American. In my own family, my grandfather would always say to outside people, he was not Indian. Before he asked me, I'm not Indian, which is often when you can know you're in an Indian community back in the 70s, everybody's going, "We're not Indian." "Well, I'm not Indian either." "Neither am I." And of course, in the city of Swanton, where Jesse was doing programs in the high school, before he was doing those programs in the high school, they wanted to have a meeting of the Abenaki people, the community, and they wanted to have it in the high school. And the assistant principal said, this is a direct quote, "Everyone knows those people are fakers, and I'm not going to allow those savages to come into my school." So we've had a long road to travel, and the fact that there's such acceptance and interest, and I think really good feeling between the Native and non-Native community in Vermont is an example of what can be done. We do things with a good mind and a positive mind, and we're patient and kind to each other. Very important, patience and kindness.
So here's a question, and it leads to something that I was wondering about too. How are these stories shared and passed along within the community? Were they shared orally, or were they written down as well? And I know that there's an effort to do the alphabet now with Tim Brooks, and I was just wondering how, but that idea of the written down language is something that I really am interested.
The history of every Native community is different in relation to all parts of communities. There's just really great diversity and complexity. And that of the Abenaki is equally diverse. Each community was a little different. The community at Missisquoi would be different from the one across the border in Canada, where you had many graduates from Dartmouth College in the 19th century who went on to write books within the Abenaki language. So many of the stories can be learned and read entirely in Abenaki, written down by Peter Paul Wazokalayin for one, Joseph Laurent, Henry Lauren Masta, all educated Abenaki people, some of them chiefs, who would write down traditional stories, sometimes in English, sometimes entirely in the Abenaki language. So there is a long literary tradition and a long tradition of embracing technology within some of our communities. So as I teach the language, now I'm so lucky to have all these resources to turn to, over a dozen books that have been authored by Abenaki speakers over the last 200 or 300 years. It's pretty amazing that we have this history. Every community doesn't have that. We're lucky to.
Yeah, most recently we were able to publish a book by Elie Joubert, who just recently walked on. And Elie was really like a member of our family, like an adopted uncle, like a grandparent to my grandkids. And Elie and Jesse worked closely together for more than 2 decades and produced the contemporary Abenaki English dictionary that we published, and also a book of Elie's, which was written in English and Abenaki and English facing pages, the story of the first council fire. So there's a long literary tradition, and I know that in some communities, for example, the Cherokee, and I work closely with Cherokee people, I've written about Sequoia, they created their own script for writing their language, which I think was important at that time. I don't see a need for that right now, for us to use anything other than the contemporary way of writing, because the most important thing for us is to speak the language. We need to speak the language. We need to communicate with the language, and the programs that Jesse is doing online, and also he is the director of the Abenaki Language Immersion Program at Middlebury College, which will be doing a summer immersion program this year on site, and last year it was done virtually. So those are efforts that are very important for the language. And I know when I was in my 30s, I picked up a book from England. It was one of these encyclopedias of American Indians, and it said Abenaki, an extinct Native American people. Not only was our language gone, but we were gone too.
Oh, that's good.
From extinction in more ways than one.
Just because they say it doesn't make it so.
This is true.
So here's a good question from Gloria. She was wondering about the trials and sadness from COVID. What stories would the Abenaki bring forth for the world facing this pandemic right now?
What do you think, Jess?
Well, there's certainly a long and very hard relationship with Akwamalzawangana, with disease and sickness. It was experienced even before the Pilgrims landed in 1620 in Plymouth Rock. The people had already of Patuxet had already experienced, a massive plague, and these plagues ripped through communities of Abenaki people as well. So there is a long history of surviving through these. We are very lucky today. One thing I will say is that Native people have been appreciative and welcoming of the ability to have immunizations from diseases. And before those, we had no immunities. There were really no natural immunities like COVID, which is new to us as human beings, all of us. In North America, indigenous people had no history of animal husbandry, and so many diseases had already ravaged Europe, and people had immunities. There is a long history, and there are many records of communities being just totally decimated. So we have experienced it before, and we can say that we can survive this again for sure, and that there can be darkness and then there can be light. In fact, every day, the one thing the Wabanaki, the real tradition is about, that return of the sun, that every day we should rise and give thanks for the opportunity, the fact that the sun has returned. It represents that opportunity for a new beginning that we're all facing now. And in many ways, perhaps COVID again is just another example of our mistreatment of the earth, of the water, and it is a reaction that's affecting all of us. So I would believe that if we re-embrace our connection to our mother, to the earth, and that's something that all indigenous peoples around the world, wherever you're from, we all had that connection, and we need to find that again in modern times and in modern ways, reconnect to take care of the earth, and then we'll be better taken care of by it. I certainly believe that, and I know our stories all tell us of that balance, tabodak, that balance that is brought by that one.
We believe in medicine, the idea that medicine is there and can be found, that healing is there and can be found, but that we need to respect the medicine plants and the earth itself. Healing would be made more possible. One thing that I was told, that Jesse and I were told, we traveled together many places. We went to the Yucatan and spent some time in a Mayan village among the Lacandone people. And the elder of the village, John King Viejo, who was over 120 years old at the time, said that whenever a tree is cut in the forest, a star falls from the sky. That if we cut all the trees, the diseases that live in the forest will come out of the forest and come to the people. And there's a book written years ago called The Hot Zone that talks about how destroying the jungles of Africa and bringing us into contact with all those animals that should be left alone is often resulting in the spreading of diseases that would not otherwise be affecting human beings. So I honestly think that the healing that we need to do, the healing of the earth and the land, will also be the healing of the people. And that is the story that we need to know, we need to remember.
So great. I just have to say that both of you just expressed such joy and optimism. It's really wonderful. Thank you. So this is another question. Can you tell us something about how affiliation by clans worked traditionally, and was there a catamount clan?
The bitonlo, the long tail, literally bitonlo is the mountain lion. Bizuakami bitonlo is another name for it, a bigger word. Some of our words are very big, but there were many clans. The clan system was heavily impacted by the Catholic Church, and then by the fact that there was both the Catholic and the Protestants at war for the souls of and the allies here in the northeast of the Abenaki. And so we ended up with a two-clan system, the Bear clan, who are the Anglican and Protestants, and the Turtle Clan, who were the Catholics.
Right.
So it had really very little to do with the historical record.
Fair.
But many of the clans were the names of communities. So we had like the Tuxas people, and they were Deer Clan people in the Connecticut area. And then we had the Mohican, who were Wolf Clan people. And then we had different regions of what people are thinking of as different tribal groups who actually were representative of different animal clans of Algonquin people. And that's the Abenaki are part of what would be called Algonquian speaking people, a very, very large group. Almost 80% of speakers in North America were once speakers of Algonquian languages.
And certainly the name of the mountain lion turns up in individual names quite frequently. But as far as a mountain lion clan, I don't know of that anywhere. I do know that, for example, to the west of us, among the Haudenosaunee, who have many clans, you find turtle, wolf, and bear in all 5 of the original nations, but you don't find any felines as clan animals here in the Northeast, to my knowledge. But then again, that's to my knowledge. I do not know anywhere near everything.
So there are a lot of questions that, several different people are asking things in a different way, but how it's about the acceptability for non-Abenaki people to tell the stories that we hear and the stories from your books.
I'll say something that I think Jesse will. I would say if it's published in a book, it's good to use in classrooms and in teaching. If you are a professional storyteller, that is a whole other ballgame.
Gotcha.
And I think you need to keep that in mind. Jess, what were you going to say?
Just that, the books that I know that you have written and many other authors have written, especially those of traditional teaching stories, are wonderful, and they're meant to be used in the classroom. And those lessons are lessons that will make the world a better place, that will connect us to this place better, that we all share, like the place names, the stories, the language, are things that are for all of us. I share the language as well with everyone. It's very important. But as my father said, to go out and present yourself as a professional storyteller, you'd want to be a representative of that community, just like if you were telling stories from another part of the world.
Mm-hmm. I always say there are several things. One is acknowledgement. Mm-hmm. The second is proper acknowledgement. Don't just say, this is an American Indian story. Who is it from? And then third, knowledge. You have to know more than just the story itself to tell it properly. And fourth, you have to have permission. In many cases, we know stories that we only tell at certain times of the year. And also, we both know stories we don't share with anyone else. We keep them for ourselves.
So you both have your own websites. And so I encourage people to, there's josephbruchac.com and jbruchac.com for each of you. So I encourage people to check those out, but also your library. I bet you every single book is in all of our libraries or pretty close to it. So
now, I should also mention that we have an outdoor education center, which my other son, Jim, who I don't love as much as I love Jesse. No, my other son, Jim, runs our outdoor education center. We have our own website. We teach traditional skills. Our language programs come through the Ndakinna Center. That's NDAKINNA Center.org. NDAKINNACENTER.org. And we do monthly storytelling programs. Just did one last week. And every month we'll do a different storytelling program. The 3 of us streamed live from our outdoor education center here in Greenfield Center, New York, where we often have people visit, but you can't do it right now just because of the quarantine restrictions of COVID-19. So NdakinnaCenter.org is a place to find out more about what we teach and what we offer. And we both have, as you said, websites that are quite accessible.
Yeah. Becca Cunningham-Weiss, you said, can you share the websites and other resources in an email to participants? We might do that. I think I have almost everybody's email, so I might be able to shoot a blast email tomorrow, maybe sometime tomorrow.
Thank you.
By the way, I saw something very wise here. It's better to be white and teach than to say nothing. Don't think because you are not native that you can't talk about or share our traditions in the appropriate way. And there's nothing wrong with being white, except white doesn't exist. There's no such thing as white people. There are
There we
just
go.
people. There are people from different origins that may be European. And when we start dividing people into white and black and red, we are beginning to forget that the most important thing is humanity. You are human first, then you belong to a community and a culture. But even before that, you're part of a family. And our families are broad and our families are inclusive, and we cannot start dividing people up as people seem to want us to do these days.
Yeah. It's that whole labeling thing.
Yep.
Doesn't work. Let me see. There was one I saw here before.
I noticed someone was from Puerto Rico talking about Puerto Rican culture. And
Yeah.
my friend Jose Borrero is, of course, a person who's from Puerto Rico and very interested in the recovery of traditional culture with Taino people. It was my honor to visit Puerto Rico. And I remember going to a place called Utuado up in the rainforest, El Yunque, and finding there an original ball field that was part of the traditional culture, a culture that has not vanished, just like with our Abenaki people. People are trying to say there are no Taino people, that Puerto Rico is no longer an indigenous island, which of course it is in many ways. And as my friend Simon Ortiz, a wonderful Pueblo poet, put it, Indians are everywhere and Native people are everywhere. And that's important to remember.
What advice could you give to Abenaki people displaced from their culture to reconnect to their heritage and culture?
Jess?
I think contacting the different communities that have risen up in Vermont, they're there for that very reason. They're really places to draw our people back together. All the families are important and we want to find our relations, and it's very opening. The gatherings, the powwows that are held are open to the public are wonderful places to begin. And now in the COVID world, the websites like our own NdakinnaCenter.org, AbenakiTribe.org is one to look to. If you just want to start to if you're interested in the language or the culture, I have a YouTube page for Western Abenaki with lots of wonderful recordings and stories that you can hear on it. And then of course the literature that's out there. Just begin to immerse yourself in those things that you're drawn to, and they'll have a transformative change upon you. We can learn so much and reconnect with our place and with our heritage, even if it has been something that hasn't been a big part of our lives until just recently. I encourage you to, and there are just so many wonderful people who are coming back together now.
Yeah, as Chief John Stevens said recently, we're bringing the pieces back together. And bringing the pieces back together, the pot will hold water again. But every piece makes it stronger. And we're interested in that connection that people truly, deeply have as an honest connection, not something that's been created just for the purpose of aggrandizement or personal gain, but something that has a deeper spiritual, cultural meaning. That's what it is all about.